I blew out the anniversary candles alone. When my phone screen lit up, the cream from the cake was still on my fingertips. The message was only 4 words. Have a work thing. Not a happy anniversary. Not an apology. Not even a single extra emoji. I flipped the phone face down on the table and continued eating the steak, which had already gone cold. I cut it slice by slice, as slow as sawing through a block of wood. The housekeeper peeked in from the kitchen doorway several times, wanting to speak but holding back. For 10 years, everyone in this house had grown accustomed to this scene. I wait for him, he doesn't come back, and then I clean up the mess alone. Even the nanny thought it was a matter of course. My phone rang again. This time, it wasn't him. It was an unsaved number. The text had only one sentence. Are you coming back this year? I stared at the message, the fork in my hand frozen in midair. 10 years. A full 10 years. This number had never sent me a message. And today, it appeared. I put down my knife and fork, stood up, and walked into the bedroom. Deep inside the walk-in closet, set into the wall, was a safe. He never knew this safe existed. He thought that in these 10 years, aside from grocery shopping, cooking, and waiting on his parents, I had nothing worth locking away. I knelt and entered the code. With a soft click, the safe opened, like something long dormant finally opening its eyes. Inside was a single mahogany box. The floral carving on the lid was worn by the years, but a faint, pleasant scent still lingered. Opening the lid revealed an onyx signet ring. The black was so deep it seemed to drink the light. Engraved on the inner band was a single letter. V. It was the family sigil, placed on my thumb by my father himself on my 18th birthday. That day, he told me, "This ring has been with our family for 3 generations. From now on, no matter where you are or what you face, as long as you have this, the doors of our home will always be open for you." I gripped the ring. The cool stone against my palm gave me a long-lost sense of security. Underneath the box lay a photograph. The girl in the picture wore a crisp, white power suit, standing at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for some major corporation. Her eyes were sharp, her smile audacious. She was surrounded by a dozen reporters, the camera flashes washing out her face. Back then, the entire business world knew of the Vance heiress. At 23, she independently orchestrated a multi-billion-dollar acquisition. At 24, she was on the cover of Forbes. Everyone said she was the future of Vance Holdings. Until I met him. He appeared at a charity auction. At the time, he had just founded his tech startup, building it from scratch. He was clean-cut and sharp, speaking with a quiet confidence that was self-assured. Among a crowd of boorish, self-satisfied businessmen, he stood out like a breath of fresh air. I was drawn to his ambition. He was drawn to my brilliance. After 2 years of dating, he proposed, promising to protect me for a lifetime. When I told my father I wanted to marry him, my father was silent for a long time. He asked me one question: "Is he worth giving everything up for?" I said, "He doesn't like women who are too intimidating. I don't want to crush him with my family's name. I want to stand by his side as an ordinary wife." My father sighed, "Then go. But remember, a Vance woman can't be held down by just anyone." I locked my past in that safe. I changed my name, Alara Vance, on my official documents to a simple, common one. I told him, Julian Croft, that my parents ran a small business and were retired in a quiet town up in Connecticut. He nodded and said that was good. He didn't like complicated family dynamics. He had no idea the scale of my father's small business. He didn't know that Quiet Town was one of the wealthiest enclaves in the country. He thought he was marrying a gentle, obedient wife with no background. And for 10 years, I truly played that part. As I put the photo and the ring away, my eyes fell on a manila envelope in the corner of the safe. It was unsealed. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a hastily scrawled date and address. It was a document from 3 years ago when I secretly acquired his company's main competitor. He never knew that I was the one pulling the strings behind the business war that nearly bankrupted him. He never knew that after he fell asleep, I would get up to read financial reports, using my family's resources to secretly pave his way. He only knew that his company would inexplicably land huge contracts, that crises would miraculously resolve themselves. He thought he was just lucky. I picked up my phone and replied to the text. "I'm coming back this year. Make the arrangements for tomorrow." After sending it, I deleted the message and cleared the history. My face was reflected on the dark screen. My skin was well maintained, but my eyes were empty. 34 isn't old, but the feeling of compromising piece after piece of myself had turned me into a ghost. I was invisible. This was the wife he wanted. Quiet, obedient, never in the spotlight. In 10 years, he could count on one hand the number of times he'd taken me out. On the rare occasion, friends came over. His introduction was always, "This is my wife," and that was it. He had no interest in letting others get to know me, nor did he ever feel it was necessary for me to be part of his social circle. People at his company didn't even know he was married. A new secretary once called our home and asked, "Is this Mr. Croft's housekeeper?" I paused, then smiled and said, "Yes." She hung up. Everyone was used to treating me as if I were invisible. When my mother-in-law came over, she'd offer backhanded compliments. "This apron suits you, Alara. We're so lucky to have someone to manage the house." My sister-in-law would drop her child in my arms and go shopping, not even a thank you when she returned. During the holidays, I would orchestrate a feast for a dozen people. By the time I carried the last dish from the kitchen, every seat was taken. They'd be clinking glasses, laughing. Not a single chair saved for me. And him? He sat at the head of the table, talking business with his father, discussing stocks with his sister. He would just glance up from his conversation and say, "Babe, we're out of wine. Could you grab another bottle of Pinot from the cellar?" I'd get up to make the tea, the steam in the kitchen stinging my eyes. Fireworks exploded outside, lighting up the sky. I stood alone at the stove, holding a fresh pot of tea, suddenly unable to remember what that two-year-old girl at the ribbon-cutting ceremony looked like. The feeling was like a needle pricking the softest part of my heart. It didn't hurt, it just ached. I walked back to the dining room and placed the tea on the table. He didn't even look at me. I sat in my corner and ate every last bit of the cold vegetables. It wasn't that I wasn't wronged, it was that being wronged had become a habit, so I no longer felt it. The only thing I never got used to were the secret monthly calls from my mother. Her voice was always hushed and urgent. "Are you doing okay? Is he treating you well? Do you have enough money?" Each time I'd laugh and say, "I'm fine." There would be a few seconds of silence on the other end, and then, "Your father doesn't say it, but he thinks about you every day." I knew what she meant. It was the family rule. Once a daughter chose her own path, the family wouldn't interfere. But if she ever decided to turn back, the family would be there to catch her. I locked the safe again. As I stood, my knee hit the floor, and I winced in pain. I steadied myself against the wall and walked to the full-length mirror. I looked at the woman in the beige loungewear, hair loosely tied back, apron still stained with grease from the steak. On her feet were a pair of cotton slippers she'd had for 3 years. This was the life of a magnate's wife. 10 years of marriage had turned me, the heiress to a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate, into a pair of old slippers. My phone lit up again. This time it was him calling. I answered, and before I could speak, a cacophony of background noise voices, music poured through. His voice was tired and a little impatient. "Forgot to tell you, tonight's event is hosted by Marcus Sterling of Sterling Capital. It's a big deal, all the industry players are here. Don't overthink it. I should be back before midnight." He used "forgot to tell you," not deliberately hid it, as if telling me was something so unimportant he could forget. Holding the phone, I looked at my own calm face in the mirror and let out a soft laugh. "Okay." He probably didn't catch the meaning in my laugh. He quickly said, "You go to bed early," and hung up. I threw the phone on the bed and walked into the closet. Not to the safe this time, but to another wardrobe door. This one hadn't been opened in 10 years. Inside hung rows of formal wear. Black, white, deep blue, each piece impeccably pressed, like a silent army. At the very back was a slate-gray haute couture gown. The family's exclusive designer sent a new one every year, whether I wore it or not. This year's was a modern silk sheath, with a pearl-lined collar, a cinched waist, and a slit that went 3 inches above the knee, revealing a sliver of leg with each step. It was both regal and sharp. Pinned to the tag was a handwritten card. "May you smile this year, too." I took the gown out and laid it on the bed. Then I opened my vanity drawer. Inside, sets of jewelry were neatly arranged. Emeralds, diamonds, pearls. Each piece was priceless. Each had been hidden for 10 years. I sat at the mirror and began to apply my makeup. Foundation, eyeliner, lipstick. Stroke by stroke, it was like retracing my features on a blank canvas. The woman in the mirror slowly transformed back into the person I remembered. Eyebrows slightly arched, gaze bright and piercing, lips pursed with an air of cool authority. After the final stroke, I studied my reflection for a few seconds. Long time no see. As I put on my earrings, the phone vibrated. It was a call from Marcus Sterling himself. 3 years ago, when Julian was at his lowest, Sterling had almost swallowed his company whole. I had secretly applied pressure, and not only did Sterling back off the acquisition, he extended a low-interest loan. He owed me a favor he had yet to repay. I called him back. It rang twice before he picked up. His voice was 10 times more obsequious than it was 3 years ago. "Is it really you?" I leaned back in my chair, my voice calm. "Mr. Sterling, is Julian Croft at your party tonight?" Yes, Mr. Croft is here." He lowered his voice. "Are you coming? I can have someone meet you at the door." "No need, I'll get in myself." "Then, are you coming as Mrs. Croft, or—" I paused, looking at the eyes in the mirror that had been dormant for a decade, and a slow smile spread across my face. "Tonight, it won't be Mrs. Croft at your party." When the Rolls-Royce pulled up to the hotel entrance, the valet stared for 3 seconds before he reacted. I sat in the back, looking through the tinted window at the 50-meter red carpet and the dense crowd of media on both sides. This annual gala was indeed high profile. The line of luxury cars was long, and each one that stopped triggered a flurry of camera flashes. When my car stopped, the scene went quiet for 2 seconds, because this was a bespoke Phantom, one of only 3 in the world. Its license plate was a custom string of numbers. Seasoned reporters were already whispering to each other, trying to figure out which tycoon had arrived. The chauffeur got out and opened my door. The moment my heel touched the red carpet, the flashes became frantic. Not the polite few shots, but a crazed, continuous burst. Someone shouted, "Who is that?" No one answered, because no one knew, but that didn't stop them from mashing the shutter button. A woman in a slate gray custom gown, stepping out of a globally limited edition Rolls-Royce, that image alone was enough for a headline. I stood up straight, naturally glanced at the cameras on either side, and gave the faintest of smiles. Not the pleasing smile one gives a camera, but a condescending, slightly appraising one. The instinct for handling the media was like muscle memory, ingrained in my bones. 10 years of disuse couldn't erase it. My jewels refracted the cold, sharp light of the flashes. Emerald earrings, the pearl-lined collar, and on the ring finger of my left hand, deliberately left bare of a wedding band. I wore only the onyx signet ring. A security guard approached and apologized in a low voice, saying he needed to see an invitation. I didn't speak, just lifted my gaze slightly. The assistant behind me immediately presented a black, gold-embossed card. The guard took it, glanced at it, and his pupils visibly contracted. He returned the card with both hands, his bow a full 90 degrees. "My apologies, ma'am. This way to the VIP elevator." The VIP elevator took me directly to the top-floor Sky Ballroom. The walls were all mirrors, reflecting countless versions of me. Tall, cool, and exuding an unapproachably expensive air. A world away from the woman in cotton slippers and an apron. The elevator doors opened, and the sounds of the party washed over me. Light from crystal chandeliers scattered like crushed diamonds. In the several thousand-square-foot ballroom, people in lavish attire mingled and networked. The men were in dark suits, the women in the latest high-fashion gowns, standing in small groups, chatting. Everyone wore a meticulously crafted social mask. I stood at the entrance, not entering immediately. I was looking for someone. Soon I found him. He was on the right side of the ballroom, holding a glass of champagne, talking to several middle-aged men. He was wearing a navy blue suit tonight, his hair impeccably styled. His posture was straight, his smile warm and refined. He stood out among the paunchy, middle-aged businessmen. I knew the men around him. Marcus Sterling of Sterling Capital, Mr. Harrison of some conglomerate, and a couple of real estate tycoons. The way they were fawning over him was a completely different attitude from before I secretly paved his way 3 years ago. They didn't know why this young man's company always landed the big deals. They only knew he was on a hot streak, and they needed to get on his good side. I took 3 steps forward. My 4-inch heels made a slow, deliberate rhythm on the marble floor. The slit of my gown swayed with my steps, revealing a glimpse of a straight, pale leg. Someone noticed me. A hand holding a wine glass paused midair, eyes following my path. Then a second person, a third. The chatter slowly died down, like a stone dropped into a pond, the ripples of silence spreading outward. He was the last to notice, because he was facing away from me, deep in conversation with Sterling. He probably sensed the sudden quiet, and felt something was off. He paused and turned around. And then he saw me. The change in his expression was fascinating. First, confusion. His brow furrowed slightly, as if seeing someone both familiar and strange, his brain scrambling to match the data. Then, shock. His eyes widened, his lips parted slightly, and the champagne flute nearly slipped from his hand. Finally, anger. A deep, offended anger. He strode toward me, his steps fast and urgent, his leather shoes making dull thuds on the marble floor. When he reached me, the familiar scent of his cologne, mixed with a hint of alcohol, hit me. He grabbed my wrist, his grip so tight the bracelet dug into my bone. "What are you doing here?" His voice was a harsh whisper, his lips almost touching my ear, filled with restrained fury. "Do you know what kind of event this is? How did you get in? Who let you come?" I didn't pull my hand away, just tilted my head slightly to look into his eyes. "You don't think I could get in?" I asked softly. He was taken aback by my question, probably because he had never heard me speak to him in this tone. My usual self would have lowered her head and said, "I'm sorry, I just wanted to see," before being put in a taxi and sent home. He scanned me from head to toe, his gaze moving from my hair to my shoes, lingering on my couture gown, my emerald earrings, my bracelet, and finally, my signet ring. His pupils contracted violently, and his face grew darker. "Where," he gritted out, "did you get all this? You know your family situation. Do you have any idea how much it costs to rent these things?" 10 years of marriage, and upon seeing jewelry worth a small fortune on his wife, his first reaction was that it was rented. I suddenly laughed. The laugh must have provoked him, because the grip on my wrist tightened. He lowered his voice, his tone almost a command. "Leave. Now. Go out the side door. Don't let anyone see you. Sterling and the others are here. Do you know how important tonight is? We'll talk at home." "Mr. Croft." A voice interrupted him from behind. Marcus Sterling walked over, holding a glass of red wine, his face plastered with an obsequious smile. He approached us, his gaze pausing for a fraction of a second on Julian's hand gripping my wrist before quickly looking away. His smile deepened. He bowed slightly to me. "You've arrived. Why didn't you say anything? I would have had someone greet you at the entrance. This is a great discourtesy." Julian froze. He looked at Sterling, then at me. His expression shifted from anger to confusion, and from confusion to a dawning, ominous premonition. His hand was still on my wrist, but the force had slackened. "Sterling," he frowned, "you know my wife?" "Your wife?" The two words came out of Sterling's mouth, and his face twisted into a complex expression of someone who wanted to laugh but didn't dare, who wanted to explain but didn't know where to start. He opened his mouth, looked at me, then at Julian, and finally chose to shut it. I gently pulled my wrist, now red, from Julian's grasp and nodded at Sterling. "You're too kind, Mr. Sterling. The venue is lovely tonight." Sterling waved his hands frantically. "Not at all, not at all. Your presence is an honor for us." "Does Mr. Vance know you're here?" "He doesn't," I said. "I wanted to give him a surprise." Sterling's eyes lit up. Yes, a surprise. Mr. Vance is right over there. Shall I take you?" "No need." I looked toward the deepest part of the ballroom, a VIP lounge, separated by tall plants and screens. A couple of security guards in black suits stood on either side, their presence a clear step up from the general security. "I'll go myself." Julian was rooted to the spot. He wasn't a fool. Marcus Sterling, the head of Sterling Capital, was notoriously arrogant in the financial world. The number of people he would bow to could be counted on one hand. And now, Sterling's attitude toward me wasn't just polite, it was practically reverent. He whipped his head around to look at Sterling, his voice strained. "Sterling, you know her?" Sterling gave him a look one might give a dead man walking, and said nothing. Julian then looked at me, his eyes filled with a new panic and something I had never seen before. He opened his mouth, wanting to say something, but nothing came out. He was finally realizing it. The wife he thought was unpresentable was here tonight, wearing a gown he could never afford in his lifetime, adorned with jewels he'd only seen in auction catalogs, and making his top connection bow and scrape. This was not the same person from his reality. I turned and walked toward the VIP area. Just as I took a step, he suddenly reached out to grab me. I sidestepped, my heel pivoting in a graceful arc. I glanced back at him. "You said this event was important, didn't you? Then don't embarrass yourself here." His face went white. I didn't spare him another glance and walked straight toward the guarded screen. I heard Sterling's low voice behind me, as if gritting his teeth. "Mr. Croft, do you have any idea who she is?" I didn't hear the answer because I had reached the entrance to the VIP lounge. The guards first looked at me, puzzled, then their eyes fell on the onyx ring on my thumb. The ring was a deep, translucent black under the lights, the V on the inside barely visible. The guards' expressions instantly became deferential. They stood straight, hands at their sides, and bowed slightly, clearing the path. I walked behind the screen. It was a separate lounge, much quieter than the main hall. A few leather sofas and a rosewood tea table were the only furniture. A man was sitting on one of the sofas. His hair was graying, but he was full of vigor, dressed in a deep gray bespoke suit. He was turning a sleek, expensive-looking fountain pen in his hand. Two assistants stood beside him, reporting something in low voices. His presence was immense. Just by sitting there, he seemed to command the entire space. 10 years. He had aged so much. His hair was mostly white. The wrinkles at the corners of his eyes were deeper, but those eyes were as sharp as they were a decade ago. Hearing footsteps, he looked up, his gaze sweeping over casually. Then it froze. The fountain pen slipped from his fingertips and clattered onto the tea table with a crisp sound. He looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. His body went rigid, and then he slowly rose to his feet. His assistants, startled by his reaction, reached out to steady him, but were shoved away. He took 2 steps toward me, his gait a little unsteady. His lips trembled. He stared at me for a full 10 seconds, his eyes slowly turning red. Then he spoke, his voice hoarse, as if squeezed from his chest, trembling, choked with emotion, filled with 10 years of suppressed longing and heartache. "Alara, what are you doing here?" The entire ballroom fell silent. The VIP screen was semi-open, and his words carried out, completely unobstructed. Everyone in the hall heard those words. Everyone stopped what they were doing and turned to look in our direction. Julian stood in the crowd, his face as white as a sheet of paper. I walked forward, bent down to pick up the pen, and placed it back in his hand. I held his slightly trembling hand and gave him the first genuine smile I had shown in 10 years. "Dad, I'm here to take you home." His hand trembled violently in mine. This man who had dominated the business world for 30 years, who had driven competitors to bankruptcy without blinking, was now like a child who had lost a beloved toy and suddenly found it again. His eyes were frighteningly red, his lips quivered for a long time, and he couldn't manage a second word. He held my hand, repeatedly stroking the onyx signet ring on my thumb, as if to confirm that the person before him was real. His fingers were rough, with prominent knuckles and calluses, remnants of his early entrepreneurial days working in factories. These hands had signed billion-dollar contracts and shaken hands with world leaders, but now they trembled like a leaf in the wind. His voice was still hoarse. "You've gotten thin." Just those few words and tears streamed down his face. A billionaire, one of the richest men in the country, crying in front of hundreds of business elites with no attempt to hide it. His assistants behind him were stunned. They exchanged glances and silently took a few steps back. In all their years with him, they had probably never seen their boss show such an expression. My own eyes stung, but I held back the tears. Tonight was not for crying. "Dad, everyone's watching," I said, holding his hand firmly, trying to keep my tone light. "You have a reputation to maintain." He wiped his face messily with his other hand, his voice still muffled. "I lost my daughter for 10 years. What the hell do I need a reputation for?" The statement was delivered with surprising force, and the people outside heard it loud and clear. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the room. The polite chatter died instantly, replaced by low, urgent whispers as people exchanged bewildered glances, but no one moved to pick it up. Everyone held the same posture, necks craned, mouths slightly agape, eyes glued to the VIP area. What had they just heard? Arthur Vance, a permanent fixture in the top 10 of the Forbes list, had just called a woman in her 30s daughter, and his only daughter had vanished from the public eye 10 years ago. The world knew she had married quietly and withdrawn from family business, but no one knew who she married, or what she looked like now. Wait a minute, just moments ago, this woman was standing with Julian Croft, and Julian Croft had said, "My wife." The amount of information was too much to process. Everyone's brains short-circuited for a few seconds. Then, in unison, hundreds of pairs of eyes, like searchlights, locked onto Julian. He stood in the middle of the crowd, his face drained of all color. It wasn't just pale, it was a nearly translucent, deathly white. Fine beads of sweat dotted his forehead, glistening coldly under the lights. His hand was still frozen in the posture he'd used to grab my wrist, fingers slightly curled, suspended in midair. The champagne glass was long gone, its contents splattered on his expensive shoes. but he didn't seem to notice. Marcus Sterling, standing beside him, took a half step back, as if drawing a clear line between them. Another CEO was already on his phone, likely searching for 10-year-old business news to confirm what the Vance heiress looked like. Julian's lips moved, as if to say something, but only a faint, inaudible hiss escaped his throat. I knew what he wanted to ask. He wanted to ask, "You are Arthur Vance's daughter?" He wanted to ask, "Why didn't you ever tell me in 10 years?" He wanted to ask, "Who are you?" All the questions were written on his face, in his rapidly contracting pupils, on his trembling fingers. But I wasn't looking at him. I helped my father sit down on the sofa and poured him a cup of tea. He took it, didn't drink, and placed it on the table. He took my hand again, the pain and guilt in his eyes so thick it was suffocating. He lowered his voice, but the commanding pressure had returned, the tone he used only with his adversaries. "Tell me, Dad wants to know, what kind of life have you been living with him these 10 years? Dad, Tell me," my father said, his voice dangerously quiet. "What kind of life have you been living with him?" He didn't raise his voice, but the sudden shift in his tone made the air in the room freeze. He bypassed me, his gaze locking with deadly precision onto the rigid figure in the crowd. Julian. Not Mr. Croft, not his full name, just a cold, dismissive summons. The weight of that from Arthur Vance's lips was understood by everyone present. It wasn't mere disregard. It was the ultimate, suppressed fury of a father who had just discovered his daughter had been mistreated for a decade. Julian didn't move. Not because he didn't want to, but because his legs had gone weak. His knees were visibly trembling, even under his suit trousers. His Adam's apple bobbed several times before he finally forced himself to take the first step. The short walk felt like miles. Every step was like walking on knives, and the stares from all sides were like countless needles piercing his back. He had always been the center of attention, the most dazzling person in the room. He had never been treated like a criminal about to be sentenced. He reached the entrance of the VIP lounge. A security guard stopped him. My father waved a hand, and the guard stepped aside. Julian stood about 10 feet away from us, a distance that allowed him to see every wrinkle on my father's face, and for me to see the bead of sweat rolling down his temple. He opened his mouth, his voice as dry as sandpaper on glass. Mr. Vance." My father slowly adjusted his cuffs. "You haven't earned the right to call me that. In my boardroom, we call what you did a breach of trust. In my family, we call it signing your own death warrant." The words were like a slap, making him stagger. He instinctively looked at me, his eyes pleading for help. I knew that look well. It was the same look he gave me whenever he needed me to handle a difficult client for him during our 10 years of marriage. Except this time, the difficult client was my father. I lifted my teacup, blew on it gently, and avoided his gaze. My father took a step forward. Julian instinctively took a half step back but forced himself to stand his ground. My father looked him up and down, his gaze sweeping from his navy suit to his handmade leather shoes, finally settling on the discreet cufflinks at his wrist. "You wear this brand of suit? You wear these kinds of cufflinks?" His voice was low, but every word was like a dull knife carving flesh. "Do you have any idea what your wife wears at home?" Julian froze. "She wears faded sweatpants and worn-out sneakers that she hasn't replaced in 3 years, my father said, enunciating every word. "Her apron is covered in grease stains that won't wash out. Her hands crack in the winter because she has to wash the dishes and do the laundry for your entire family. Did you know any of this?" Julian's throat moved, but he couldn't speak. "You think your smooth sailing all these years was because of you?" My father sneered and took a file from his assistant, flipping through a few pages. 3 years ago, Croft Technologies' cash flow broke. Sterling Capital was about to acquire you. You were so anxious you didn't sleep for 3 days. Then Sterling Capital suddenly withdrew their offer and gave you a low-interest loan. You thought it was because of your great reputation? Julian's head snapped toward Marcus Sterling. Sterling stood in the crowd, his expression clearly saying, "Don't look at me. I didn't say anything. 5 years ago, you couldn't land that government contract with Meridian. Your competitor's bid was 200 million lower, and they were ready to sign. Then Meridian suddenly switched to you. You thought it was because your proposal was better?" Julian's face had turned from white to a sickly gray. "And your company's core technology patents, sued for infringement time and time again, always settling out of court. You thought your opponents were afraid of you?" My father threw the file on the table. The papers scattered, revealing dense clauses and signatures. He leaned back on the sofa, looking at Julian with the kind of disdain one reserves for an insect. "Every single time you were saved from the brink of disaster, It was my daughter cleaning up your mess behind your back. The air froze. Julian looked as if his spine had been ripped out. He stood there, swaying, on the verge of collapse. He looked at me, his eyes shot with red veins, his lips trembling for a long time before he finally squeezed out a few words. It was? You? I put down my teacup and finally looked up, meeting his gaze. I had looked into those eyes for 10 years, from the tenderness of our early love, to the indifference of our marriage, to the terror and suspicion of tonight. I found that I was surprisingly calm, like a lake that had been windswept for a decade and had finally frozen over. You were helping me all along? He asked again, his voice raspy. Not helping you, I said, my tone flat, as if discussing something completely unrelated to me. I was cleaning up your messes. Without me, what do you think you, Julian Croft, would amount to? When those words fell, the entire ballroom was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming. Julian swayed, and behind him, someone muttered, "Oh my God, Croft's wife is a Vance?" Then a tide of whispers rose, spreading like wildfire. A Vance? That Vance family? Arthur Vance's only daughter? The genius who orchestrated that billion-dollar deal 10 years ago? She married Julian Croft? For 10 years? Didn't Croft say his wife came from a normal family? Look at his face. He didn't even know himself. Marrying a billionaire's daughter and treating her like a maid. Is he insane? The voices weren't loud, but they were clear enough for him to hear. He stood at the center of the vortex of public opinion, every whisper a knife scraping against his bones. His pride was immense. He was always the one embarrassing others, never the one being embarrassed. But tonight, in front of hundreds of people, he had become the biggest joke in the room. My father looked at him, his eyes devoid of any sympathy. My daughter told me she wanted to marry a self-made, ambitious young man, he said, his voice sinking. She said he didn't like strong women, so she didn't want to use her family background to intimidate him. She said she wanted to be an ordinary wife, to be by his side. He paused, his voice suddenly sounding much older. I thought the man she chose would at least be sincere with her. That statement was crueler than any accusation. Julian's eyes turned red, not from anger, but from genuine pain. He clenched his fists, his knuckles white, his whole body tensed like a fully drawn bow. He looked at me, his eyes filled with regret, shock, fear, and something else I couldn't quite decipher. It was probably the dawning realization of what he had missed out on for the past 10 years. Alara, he called my name, his voice trembling violently. I didn't know. I really didn't know. Why didn't you tell me? I looked at the face that had once made my heart race and suddenly found it amusing. Tell you? I stood up slowly, meeting his gaze. If I had told you, would you have let me attend your work events? He said nothing. Would you have stopped your family from treating me like a maid? He still said nothing. On our anniversary, would you have saved the stroke of midnight for me? My voice remained calm, as if I were asking him what he'd had for lunch, but his face had completely crumpled. Something welled up in his eyes, and he bit his lips so hard his jaw muscles twitched. You wouldn't, I answered for him. You would have just found a different way to use me. No, he took a step forward but was blocked by the guards. He struggled, raising his voice. Alara, I'm not that kind of person. I really what? I cut him off. Really love me? Julian, it's been 10 years and you don't even know what kind of person I am. Who is it that you love? He was stumped. I adjusted the sleeve of my gown, my movements elegant and composed, like folding a used napkin after a meal. Then I looked at my father and said softly, Dad, I'm tired. I want to go home. My father immediately stood up and took my hand, his voice gentle, as if he were a different person. Okay, let's go home. Dad will take you home. Wait! He suddenly broke free from the guards and rushed in front of me. His hair was a mess, his tie askew. The confident Mr. Croft from 3 minutes ago was gone. His eyes were terrifyingly red, tears glistening in them. His voice was almost a shout. Alara, 10 years! No matter what you think, in these 10 years, I have never done anything to betray you. You can't just leave like this. I stopped and looked back at him. Just one look. You've never done anything to betray me? I smiled, a cool, faint smile. Julian, go ask. Ask your friends, ask your secretary, ask your family. Ask them what kind of life Mrs. Croft lived in your house for the past 10 years. I turned to the crowd in the hall, my voice not loud, but every word crystal clear. Everyone, I am Alara Vance, Arthur Vance's daughter. For the past 10 years, I have washed the dishes for your family's meals, washed all of your family's clothes. I have raised my sister-in-law's child. I have tended to my in-laws' every need. On holidays, I cook a feast for a dozen people. And while everyone sat laughing and clinking glasses, I was the one running back and forth to the kitchen, treated more like the hired help than a member of the family. By the time I finally sat down, the conversation flowed around me as if I didn't even exist. Someone in the crowd gasped. Someone covered their mouth. Every trump card Julian Croft's company has was laid by me. Every major client he has my family's connections behind them. He doesn't even know what I majored in, what awards I won in college. He has no idea that the woman he married was once the youngest person on the Forbes 30 Under 30 list for business leaders. I paused, looking at him. He stood there like a statue drenched in a storm, the last bit of light in his eyes extinguished. "You married a woman you thought was a maid," I said. "And I married a man I thought was my love. We're even." After I said that, the hall was silent for a full 10 seconds. Not a normal silence, but the kind where everyone is afraid to even breathe too loudly. Hundreds of impeccably dressed business elites were now frozen like wooden dolls. Someone's phone vibrated, and they fumbled to silence it as if they had committed a great crime. He stood 3 steps away from me, with hundreds of eyes at his back, and my father and me in front of him. His face could no longer be described as just pale. It was a grayness that comes from being utterly crushed. His lips moved several times, as if he wanted to argue, but each time he opened his mouth, no sound came out, because what I said was the truth. Every word was the truth, and he knew it better than anyone. My father stood beside me, holding my hand, his own fingers still trembling slightly. After hearing my speech, he didn't look at Julian. Instead, he looked down at me. His eyes were still red, but the fatherly softness was gone, replaced by the fury of a lion seeing its cub wounded. 10 years, my father said, his voice laced with a quiet, terrifying calm. 10 years of her youth. 10 years, I agreed. Of building his foundation while he kept me hidden in the dark, treating my silence as ignorance. My father closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Those who knew him understood this gesture. It meant he was suppressing an immense rage. In his younger days, they called him the Lion for his ferocity in negotiations. He had mellowed with age, smiling like a friendly neighbor. But those who truly knew him knew that when he closed his eyes and took a deep breath, he was at his most furious. "Good," he said, opening his eyes. His voice was calm again, a calm more frightening than any outburst. "Very good." He turned to face the hall. The several hundred people instinctively took a step back. His gaze swept across the room and landed on a corner. An older couple and a young woman stood there, their faces as white as paper. They had come in through another entrance. The party was so exclusive, Julian's family had somehow managed to get invitations. They just hadn't been standing with him. They had probably hoped to use the opportunity to network and boost their own status. Now, their status was certainly boosted. Everyone in the room was looking at them. My mother-in-law wore a maroon dress, her hair in tight curls, the foundation on her face thick under the lights. Just moments ago, she had been boasting to a wealthy woman beside her about how successful her son was, how many heiresses wanted to marry into the Croft family. She hadn't even finished her sentence when she heard my father's cry of Alara. The napkin in her hand had fallen to the floor. My father-in-law stood beside her, his suit slightly old, the cuffs frayed. He was a quiet man with little say at home, who had spent his life doing whatever his wife told him. Now he was constantly wringing his hands, his forehead covered in sweat, his lips trembling, not daring to look at anyone. My sister-in-law, Chloe, clutched a glass of juice, her perfectly made-up face a mask of terror. Her hand was shaking, spilling juice on her dress, but she didn't notice. The 3 of them had heard every word I said. The thousands of meals, the being treated like a maid, the eating cold leftovers. Every word was a boomerang that had flown into their ears and was now being infinitely amplified under everyone's gaze. My father looked at my mother-in-law and spoke, "Mrs. Croft." Just those 2 words, and she flinched. She opened her mouth and forced a smile that was uglier than a grimace. Mr. Vance. My daughter has been married to your son for 10 years. Every holiday, she cooks a feast for your entire family, and after you've all eaten, you don't even save her a clean plate? My mother-in-law's face turned a deep, ugly red. Her lips trembled as she stammered, "No, that's not it. She said she wanted to eat last. We didn't make her." My father let out a laugh, a laugh so cold it could freeze wine. The entire family is seated, and she's the only one busy in the kitchen. After you're all done, she sits at a corner of the table to eat cold leftovers. You say you didn't make her? Then, did any of you save her a plate? Did any of you say a single, thank you? When she sat down, did any of you hand her a clean fork? My mother-in-law was speechless, bombarded by the questions. She stumbled back, bumping into the dining table behind her. The wine glasses on it wobbled. She instinctively reached out to steady them, but her hand was shaking too much. Chloe suddenly spoke up, her voice shaking, playing the victim as she always did. But your family! Why would you do this to Julian? Did you set a trap for us all these years? Miss Croft. Chloe's voice was cut off as if by a switch. I took 2 steps toward her. The sound of my heels on the marble floor was slow and steady, each step firm. Chloe was 5 years younger than me, now 29, spoiled like a princess in the Croft household. Over the past decade, she had thrust her son into my arms countless times, saying, "Here, you watch him for a bit," before going out shopping. She never even said thank you when she returned. On a good day, she might even criticize, "Why did you dress him in this color? It's so ugly." I walked up to her and glanced down at the Cartier bracelet on her wrist. "That bracelet," I said, "you bought it with the money your brother gave you 3 years ago, didn't you?" She froze, instinctively covering her wrist. "That money," I smiled. "I was the one who helped your brother get it. Without that money, your brother's company would have gone bankrupt long ago. You wouldn't have been able to afford even a fraction of that bracelet." The color drained from Chloe's face instantly. "You spend my money, shove your child at me, and then complain about how I raise him?" I said, word by word. "Are you even worthy?" When the word worthy landed, tears streamed down Chloe's face. Not tears of grievance, but of humiliation. She opened her mouth to argue, but some shred of reason must have remained. She knew the woman in front of her was no longer the sister-in-law she could order around. This was Arthur Vance's daughter, someone at the top of the corporate food chain. She chose to shut her mouth, tears splashing onto her bracelet. A frail, older male voice spoke from behind her. It was my father-in-law. He had been silent until now, but finally couldn't hold it in any longer. His voice trembled, but there was a hint of genuine remorse in it. "Alara, we've wronged you all these years. We didn't know. We really didn't know your family," he probably wanted to say, "is so rich," but caught himself mid-sentence and swallowed the rest. I turned to him. My father-in-law was the only one in the Croft family who had been remotely decent to me. Though that decency was limited to a "you've worked hard during the holidays," he at least never criticized or ordered me around. Sometimes, when I brought out the dishes, he would say, "You should eat too." And he was the best the Croft family had to offer. "You don't need to apologize," I said to him, my tone softer. "You didn't do anything." My father-in-law's eyes reddened, and he lowered his head. My mother-in-law, however, had regained some of her courage. I don't know where she found it, but she suddenly took a step forward, her voice sharp and loud. "So we didn't know she was rich. But we didn't abuse her either. What's wrong with washing some clothes and cooking some meals? Which wife doesn't do housework? Besides, she never said anything. If she had told us earlier, of course we would have told you earlier, and you would have treated her better." My father cut her off. His voice wasn't loud, but each word landed like a block of iron. My mother-in-law froze. "She was 24 when she married into your family. She gave up her career, gave up everything. Changed her name to be your daughter-in-law." He took a step forward, his presence so powerful that my mother-in-law involuntarily retreated. "Her silence was her choice. She was showing your family respect. Did you ever respect her? You couldn't even be bothered to ask who she was." My mother-in-law's face was now completely unhinged. Her lips trembled, and her eyes reddened. "My daughter, Arthur Vance's daughter, was raised in luxury. I never even let her wash a single bowl. At 20, she was top of her class at Wharton. At 21, she interned at Vance Holdings. At 23, she independently orchestrated a multi-billion-dollar acquisition." His voice rose with each statement. "She married into your family to wash your clothes, cook your meals, and raise your children, and you think it's a matter of course? You think that's the life she deserves?" My mother-in-law completely broke down, tears streaming down her foundation-caked face, creating streaks. Julian had been silent this whole time. From my father's questioning of his mother to my confrontation with Chloe, he hadn't said a word. He stood there, frozen, his eyes empty and dark, like a lamp that had been extinguished. Finally, he spoke. "Enough." His voice was horrifyingly hoarse, as if it had been scraped with sandpaper. He looked up, first at my father, then at me, his eyes so red they looked like they might bleed. "It's my fault," he said, his voice dropping lower. "It's all my fault." He took a step back, then another, running a trembling hand through his hair. His shoulders slumped, all his previous arrogance completely shattered. I messed up, Alara," he choked out, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice muffled and choked with suppressed sobs. The entire room was silent. I watched his bent back, his clenched fists, his slightly trembling shoulders. This man, whom I had watched for 10 years from passion to habit, from habit to disappointment, from disappointment to numbness. I thought that seeing him bow would bring me satisfaction, vindication, a desire to laugh. But at this moment, I felt only one thing: emptiness. His torso was bent over, like a statue that had suddenly collapsed. Hundreds of people watched this scene. No one spoke, no one raised a glass, no one looked at their phone. All attention was on me, waiting for my reaction. I wasn't surprised that he apologized. He wasn't a fundamentally bad person. He had just gotten used to it. Used to my sacrifices, used to my silence, used to me always standing 3 steps behind him, a shadow he could summon at will. He didn't treat me badly on purpose. He just never thought a shadow needed to be treated well. But not on purpose is not an excuse. Habit itself is a form of harm. I looked at his bowed head and was silent for about 5 seconds. Then I spoke. "Get up." His back stiffened, and he slowly straightened. He looked at me, his eyes terrifyingly red, his eyelashes even holding a hint of moisture. What was he hoping for? I could see it. He was hoping I would say, "I forgive you," or at least, "I understand." He thought his apology could buy him a second chance, or at least a way out, but I had no intention of giving him one. "I accept your apology," I said, my tone flat, as if closing a file after finishing a task, "but I don't forgive you." The hope in his eyes vanished, as if he'd been punched in the chest. He opened his mouth, his voice dry and raspy. "Alara, do you think an apology is enough?" I tilted my head, looking at him. "You think a bow and an 'I'm sorry' can just erase the last 10 years? That the thousands of dishes I washed are just forgotten? That all the humiliation I endured in your house will just disappear?" He didn't speak, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Julian, apologizing is your choice. Forgiving is my right." I took a step forward, the sound of my heels echoing in the quiet hall. "You're apologizing today because you found out who my father is. If my father weren't here tonight, if I were just a woman from an ordinary family, would you be apologizing?" He froze. "You wouldn't," I answered for him. "Because when I was at home in my $30 slippers waiting for you, you didn't apologize. When I was in the hospital on an IV and you told me to take a cab home, you didn't apologize. When your family ordered me around and you pretended not to see it, you didn't apologize. In 10 years, you had a million chances to say you were sorry. You chose today." I smiled, a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "You didn't choose me. You chose the Vance family." The words were a knife, plunging straight into his chest. His face went white, then flushed red. His lips trembled violently, the moisture in his eyes growing heavier. He clenched his fist so hard his nails dug into his palms, as if using physical pain to fight something inside. "No." His voice was almost inaudible. "That's not it." He looked up at me, his eyes bloodshot. "I admit," he said, word by word, "that I haven't been good enough to you all these years. I neglected you. I let you suffer. But to deny my feelings for you for 10 years? To say I only see the Vance family? Alara, look me in the eye and tell me, in all these 10 years, was there not a single shred of sincerity from me?" He didn't wait for my answer. His voice suddenly rose, filled with a desperate, near-breakdown urgency. "You think I didn't have pressure these past 10 years? I was out there fighting tooth and nail to make the company bigger, to give our family a better life. Yes, I wasn't home often, but every time I came back, I told you that you worked hard. I didn't take you to events because I didn't want you to have to drink, to deal with those sleazy old men. I thought I was protecting you." By the end, his voice was out of control. His chest heaved like a caged beast. Some from the hall started whispering. Some even looked at him with a hint of sympathy. From their perspective, he wasn't a villain, just an inconsiderate husband. Ignorance is bliss, after all. He really didn't know my background, and he hadn't committed any cardinal sins like cheating or abuse. A few people started looking at me with complicated expressions, probably thinking I was making too big a scene. I felt those gazes, but I wasn't flustered. I wasn't even angry, because they didn't know. There was so much they didn't know. Are you finished? I asked him. He was panting, unable to reply. I turned and took the manila envelope from my father's assistant. It had been in my safe for 3 years, the paper yellowing. I pulled out the few sheets inside, holding the edges slowly, as if unveiling long-buried evidence. You said you didn't take me to events because you didn't want me to drink. I slapped the first page down in front of him. Then tell me, what were you drinking on March 15th of last year? In the penthouse suite of the Four Seasons, with another woman. His gaze fell on the paper, and his pupils contracted violently. It was a hotel check-in record. It clearly stated, Julian Croft, Four Seasons Hotel, Penthouse Suite. Check-in time, 11:03 p.m. Co-occupant, Stella Reed. Stella Reed. I read the name, my tone as clinical as reciting a financial report. Your company's director of marketing. Been with you for 4 years. She's pretty, capable, and admires you very much. On March 15th of last year, you told me you were on a business trip to San Francisco, but you were at the Four Seasons in our city. The hall erupted. My mother-in-law covered her mouth. Chloe's eyes went wide. Even my father-in-law looked up sharply, staring at his son in disbelief. Julian's face was completely white, devoid of any color. He stared at the paper, his lips trembling for a long time before he squeezed out, How? How do you have this? How do I have this? I smiled. I looked into Stella Reed the second month she joined your company. What she did before, her family background, why she was getting close to you, I know everything. You think your company's patent lawsuits always settled because the other party was scared? It's because they had the source code. Your brilliant director of marketing, Stella Reed, leaked to them. He staggered. You said you were busy. You said you were out there fighting tooth and nail. My voice grew faster, like a series of unsheathed blades. While you were out fighting, Stella Reed was adjusting your tie. While you came home from events and passed out, her goodnight texts were still on your phone. Did you know that I knew all of this? Did you know how I felt every time I saw her name pop up on your screen? We didn't. He looked up sharply, his voice ragged. She's just a subordinate. Nothing happened between us. She got the room card. She was just delivering documents. Then why did you delete your chat history? He froze. You think I don't know? I pulled a second set of papers from the envelope, call logs and text message screenshots. You deleted your chats, but the carrier has backups. You think deleting them means no one can ever find them? I flung the papers at him. They scattered on the floor, the words clear under the lights. Late night goodnights, ambiguous tones, a level of concern that went far beyond a boss and subordinate. There were no explicit declarations of love, but it was far from an innocent professional relationship. He stared at the papers as if they were his death sentence. I didn't cheat, he said, his voice trembling, a single tear finally falling down his cheek. Alara, I swear, I never touched her. When I talked to her, I didn't have to think so much. She admired me. She made me feel important. I made you feel insecure, I finished his sentence for him. He froze, the tear still on his chin, not denying it. So, you'd rather have an ambiguous relationship with a weaker woman than to spare a second glance for the wife who waited for you at home for 10 years? I laughed. You didn't take me to your events because you were afraid I would reveal that I'm stronger than you. You didn't let me into your circle because you were afraid your friends would see that I'm smarter than you. You thought you were protecting me, but you were just protecting your own pathetic ego. My words came faster and faster, a downpour of accusations. He just stood there, no longer listening, but enduring. You were used to me looking up to you. But you forgot. I have never been someone who needs to look up to anyone. I turned to the hall, raising my voice. My tone no longer the suppressed calm from before, but a sharp, assertive, undeniable proclamation. Everyone, a moment ago, some of you said Mr. Croft was innocent because he didn't know. Some of you thought I was overreacting. Well, let me tell you a few more things. I held up one finger. First, the core algorithm framework for Croft Technologies was built by me 3 years ago. Without that framework, his company wouldn't have survived to this day. I held up a second finger. Second, his 3 biggest clients, Meridian, Apex, and Sterling, all have the Vance family's influence behind them. He didn't win those contracts. I got them for him. I held up a third finger. Third, I personally hold a 34% stake in Croft Technologies. Not as Mrs. Croft, but as Alara Vance. In other words, I paused, looking at his completely shattered face. I am your company's second largest shareholder. The suit you're wearing today, the shoes on your feet, every dollar of dividends you've ever received my money is in all of it. When those words landed, the hall exploded. Not with whispers, but with shocked gasps. Someone blurted out, "Oh my God!" Someone was frantically typing on their phone. Someone covered their face. In the corner, Marcus Sterling was wiping sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief, his expression screaming, "Thank God I chose the right side." My mother-in-law slumped into a chair, the foundation on her face streaked with tears. Chloe huddled beside her, clutching her arm, both of them trembling. My father-in-law hung his head, his shoulders shaking. And him? He stood there like a hollowed-out shell, his soul gone. Tears fell one by one, landing on his suit. He didn't wipe them away, just stared at me. His eyes filled not with anger or resentment, but with an overwhelming, all-consuming despair. He knew it was over, not just his company, he was over. The person named Alara Vance was gone from his life forever. He opened his mouth, trying to say something, but the sound that came out was as faint as a wisp of smoke. What kind of person did I marry? I looked at him for 3 full seconds. Then I bent down and picked up the scattered papers from the floor, one by one. My movements were unhurried, as if tidying up some worthless trash. As I straightened up, I said my last words to him on the matter. "You married a woman you thought you were too good for." I put the papers back in the envelope, my fingers brushing over the name Stella Reed. I felt nothing. 3 years ago, when I first found out, I sat in my study all night, watching the sky turn from black to gray to white. His snores from the bedroom were steady and peaceful, like a man with no secrets. That morning, when he woke up and saw me on the sofa, my eyes red and swollen, he asked, "Why are you up so early?" "Couldn't sleep," I said. He just grunted, picked up his briefcase, and left, not bothering to ask another question. Thinking back, that was probably the moment my heart died. Not the moment I discovered his potential affair, not the moment he told me to go to the hospital alone. It was the moment he saw my swollen eyes and couldn't even be bothered to ask, "What's wrong?" I handed the envelope back to my father's assistant and turned to face him. He was still in the same spot, his tears dried, leaving faint tracks on his face. His eyes were still red, but the breakdown had passed, replaced by something deeper, a hollowness. He was like a building with all its support beams removed. The facade was still standing, but the inside had collapsed. He watched me hand over the envelope. A sound escaped his throat. "Don't go." It was so quiet only my father and I could hear it. My father frowned, about to speak, but I put a hand on his arm. Julian took another step forward. The guards tensed. I waved them off. He came to stand before me, so close I could smell the familiar pinewood scent of his cologne, so close I could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes. "Alara," he whispered my name, his voice light and broken. "I know you hate me right now. You think I'm a hypocrite, that I'm heartless, that I'm not worthy of you. You can hate me. Hate me all you want." He took a deep breath, his eyes welling up again. "But you can't just leave." I looked at him silent. 10 years, he choked out the words. We were together for 10 years. Not 10 days, not 10 months. 10 years. Over 3,000 days and nights. Do you remember our first apartment? The kitchen was so small, only one person could fit. When you cooked, I would just hover behind you. You'd shoo me away, tapping my hand with the spatula. His voice broke. "I haven't forgotten." "You said I forgot," he continued, tears streaming down again. "I didn't forget. That first anniversary, I bought you a scarf. A cheap one, from a street vendor. $20. You were so happy you wore it all winter. I thought to myself back then, I have to make enough money to buy you the best things in the world. But then you made the money. I finished for him. You bought a big house, a luxury car, designer suits. You had money for everything. You just didn't have time." He froze. "The scarf is still in my closet," I said flatly. "I take it out every winter. But it was only this year that I understood. You bought me that scarf back then because you had me in your heart. You stopped buying me anything later because you didn't have me in your heart anymore. You were just used to having someone at home waiting for you." "No, listen to me." "Good night," I said. It wasn't loud, but he immediately fell silent. "Julian, this isn't an impulsive decision. You asked me earlier if I could look you in the eye and tell you that you never had any sincere feelings for me. I'll tell you. You did. You were sincere, in the first couple of years." The tears came again. "But so what?" I said. "A $20 scarf warmed me for 2 years. The cold of the next 8 years is something that scarf can't warm." When those words landed, he staggered, as if he'd been hit by a physical blow. He gaped, tears falling in large drops, a choked sound coming from his throat, half sob, half strangled cry. He was truly crying now. Not the suppressed, single-tear kind, but a full-blown breakdown. His shoulders shook violently, his chest heaved. He clutched the lapels of his suit, his knuckles white, and bent over like a defeated boxer, using the last of his strength to keep himself from falling to his knees. "I was wrong," he sobbed, the words muffled. "I was so wrong. Alara, I'll do anything. Divorce me, take the company, anything. Just don't look at me like that. Don't look at me with those eyes." He looked up, his face a mess of tears, his eyes so swollen he could barely open them. "Hate me, yell at me, hit me, anything is better than the way you're looking at me right now." I knew what he meant, the look of calm, no hatred, no emotion, a dead, stagnant pool, because the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. If someone still hates you, it means they still care. When they can't even be bothered to hate you, it's truly over. "I don't want your company," I said. "My lawyer will send you the share transfer agreement tomorrow. All resources Vance Holdings has provided you will be withdrawn, starting today. How far Croft Technologies goes from now on is up to you." His sobs stopped for a second, then grew louder, turning into howls. A man in his 30s, in a bespoke suit worth thousands, in front of hundreds of business elites, crying like a child who had lost his entire world. Behind him, Marcus Sterling looked down. Another CEO quietly backed away. The men who had been calling him brother just an hour ago now couldn't even look at him. Rats fleeing a sinking ship. He wouldn't be blind to that. He had built his career on Vance resources, on the path his wife had secretly paved for him, and today, all those paths were cut off. He wasn't begging me to stay. He was begging for his future, his reputation, everything he had fought for 10 years. But after all this time in the business world, he should have understood one thing. Adults have to pay for their choices. "Julian." I knelt to be at his eye level. "Listen to me. In these 10 years, I have never regretted marrying you. Because when I made that choice, I truly loved you. I don't regret having loved you. But starting today, my voice was a whisper, as light as a feather on snow. I don't love you anymore." He looked up, his tear-streaked face a ruin. Can you just give me one more chance?" On the night of March 15th of last year, at the Four Seasons, I asked him, "Did you give me a chance?" He froze, as if struck by lightning. His lips parted, but not a single word came out. "I believe you," I said, standing up and stepping back. "I believe nothing physical happened between you. Julian, you never even gave me a chance to hear an explanation. Why should I give you one now?" He collapsed against the edge of the nearest table, his suit wrinkled, his hair a mess, the tear tracks on his face glowing a cold white under the lights. He looked pathetic, like a man who had just watched his entire house burn down. I turned my back on him. The crowd in the hall automatically parted for me. Their expressions were varied. Shock, sympathy, fear, a glint of excitement in some eyes, probably happy to have material for their social media tomorrow. As I passed Marcus Sterling, he bowed deeply and muttered, "Miss Vance, take care." As I passed the Croft family, my mother-in-law looked up sharply, her mouth open as if to say something. I didn't slow down, just glanced at her. She immediately shut her mouth. Chloe hid behind her, still clutching her Cartier bracelet, not daring to meet my eyes. Only my father-in-law suddenly stood up, his face a mess of wrinkles, his voice trembling. "Alara, you're a good kid. The Crofts have wronged you." I nodded at him, saying nothing more. As I reached the elevator, I heard rushed footsteps behind me. I didn't turn around. I knew it was him. He had chased after me. "Alara!" His voice was at its limit, raw and torn. He stumbled toward me, but was stopped by security. He struggled, reaching out. "Just tell me one thing!" he shouted. "In these 10 years, was there ever a day you were truly happy? Even one day?" The elevator doors opened in front of me, revealing warm light and mirrors reflecting my tall, slate-gray figure. I stood at the entrance, my back to him, and was silent for about 3 seconds. "Yes," I said without turning. "But those days were too few. I can barely remember them now." The doors slowly closed, shutting out his heart-wrenching cries. The elevator descended, the mirrors reflecting countless versions of me. Each one was in a couture gown, standing perfectly straight, her eyes bright and dry. I looked at my reflection for a long time, making sure my eyes weren't red. Then I reached up and adjusted the collar of my gown. The pearls were cool and smooth under my fingertips. The elevator reached the ground floor with a soft chime. The lobby was even more crowded than before. Someone must have posted on social media. A mob of people with phones was blocking the entrance. The hotel manager was personally directing security. He saw me and rushed over, sweat beading on his forehead. "Miss Vance, there are reporters outside. Would you like to use the underground garage?" I glanced through the glass doors. The camera flashes were as dense as fireflies on a summer night. A reporter had a camera on his shoulder, aimed directly at the entrance. "No, we'll use the main entrance." The manager paused, then bowed and stepped aside, signaling to his guards. I walked to the center of the lobby. The elevator chimed again behind me, and then his voice, so hoarse it was almost unrecognizable. "Alara!" I didn't stop. He chased me into the lobby, his steps chaotic and urgent. I paused at the revolving door and looked back at him. He was a mess. A button was missing from his suit, his tie was crooked, the tear tracks on his face were still wet. His family trailed behind him. His mother was being supported, her face ashen. Chloe's eye makeup was completely ruined. Julian ran to about 15 feet away from me before being stopped by hotel security. He bent over, hands on his knees, gasping for air. When he looked up, his eyes were so swollen he could barely open them. "Where are you going?" "Home." "Which home?" His voice trembled like a drowning man clutching at the last piece of driftwood. I looked at him for 2 seconds, then smiled. "The Vance home." As those words landed, the door of the Rolls-Royce outside opened. The chauffeur got out, opened the back door, and stood waiting. The flashes exploded. The sound of shutters was deafening. The light made him squint, his face contorting for a moment before returning to that desperate plea. "You can't just leave!" He broke free from security and took 2 steps toward me, his voice urgent and raspy. "Let's talk this out properly. I can leave with nothing. I'll give you everything. Whatever you want, just give me a chance." "Julian." I cut him off, my voice not loud, but clear enough for everyone present to hear. "I gave you your dignity in the ballroom." He stopped, his lips white. "If you insist on having this conversation here, then let's have it." I turned to face him, to face the crowd of onlookers behind him. "Listen, I don't need your money. I don't need your company. I don't need you to leave with nothing. I, Alara Vance, am not lacking in any of those things." I took a step forward. He involuntarily took a step back. "What I'm lacking is 10 years, over 3,000 days and nights, the respect and companionship a husband owes his wife. These are things you cannot give me. You say you want to give them to me now, not because you've seen the light, but because you're scared." His face was ashen, his lips trembling violently. He wanted to speak, but I gave him no chance. "You're not afraid of losing me. You're afraid of losing the Vance family's resources. You're afraid of waking up tomorrow morning to find your company back where it started. Your friends." He couldn't move, as if nailed to the floor. "You don't love me. You love the idea of the gentle, obedient Mrs. Croft. And that person," I said, enunciating every word, "was never me." With that, I turned and walked toward the revolving door. The flashes pierced through the glass, blinding. I walked into the light, my heels clicking on the marble floor, the sound crisp and decisive. Behind me, I heard his final hoarse scream. "Alara, if you leave, don't ever come back." I didn't turn around. I didn't stop. The revolving door turned, and the cold night air hit me, lifting the hem of my gown. At the bottom of the steps, the convoy was waiting. 3 black Rolls-Royces. The door to the middle one was open. My father was already inside. The media was in a frenzy. Someone shouted, "Miss Vance, look over here." Someone was live streaming on their phone. I stood at the top of the steps and suddenly remembered being 22, on the steps of the Vance Holdings ribbon cutting, surrounded by the same flashes. Back then, I thought I would spend my life conquering the business world. I never imagined I would choose to wash my hands of it all for one man. I didn't regret it. I had just taken a wrong turn. Now, I was turning back. I walked down the steps and got into the car. The door closed behind me, shutting out all the flashes and the noise. The car was silent, a faint mix of leather and sandalwood in the air. My father sat beside me. He watched me sit down, watched me fasten my seatbelt. Then he reached out and gently patted the back of my hand. His hand was no longer shaking. It was warm and dry. "We're home." Just those 2 words, and my eyes suddenly burned. The tears I had held back all night finally broke free. Not sobbing, just silent tears streaming down my face, landing on the pearl collar of my gown, making them cool to the touch. My father said nothing, just held my hand tighter. The convoy slowly pulled away from the hotel's circular driveway. Through the rear window, I saw one last image. He had rushed out of the hotel and was standing on the steps, his suit disheveled, his hair a mess in the wind, the tear tracks on his face reflecting the streetlights. He watched the cars leave, a broken statue swallowed by a sea of flashes. He staggered forward a few steps, his knees gave out, and he collapsed onto the steps at the hotel entrance. A man rushed over to help him up. It was Marcus Sterling. He shoved Sterling's hand away and shouted something, his mouth open, but the sound was blocked by the window. I could see his lips, though. He was shouting my name, over and over. The cars turned a corner, and his figure grew smaller, finally melting into the cold glare of the flashes, disappearing completely from my sight. I turned my head, leaned back against the seat, and closed my eyes. The tears were still falling, but the stone that had been weighing on my heart for 10 years had finally shattered. "Dad," I said, "I want to go back to work." My father was silent for 2 seconds. Then I heard him chuckle softly. It was a laugh full of pain, pride, and a hint of relieved sighing. "Your office has always been waiting for you." The position of executive vice president of Vance Holdings was never given to anyone else. The city lights flew by outside the window, a river of 1,000,000 homes flowing past my blurred vision. I suddenly remembered our wedding year. He had held my hand and said, "From now on, where I am is your home." The words were true then. They just became false later. But it didn't matter anymore. I was my own home. The next morning, lawyers appeared punctually at the entrance of Croft Technologies. Share transfer agreements, divorce papers, an asset division list. 3 documents, neatly arranged in a manila envelope. No extra conditions, no messy entanglements. Alara Vance was leaving with nothing. Vance Holdings was withdrawing all its resources. From this day forward, Croft Technologies was on its own. When the news broke, the entire business world exploded. The executive VP of Vance Holdings, Arthur Vance's only daughter, the genius who had orchestrated a multi-billion-dollar acquisition at 23, was Julian Croft's wife from a normal family. And Julian Croft had married this heiress for 10 years, let her wear an apron for thousands of meals, wash dishes for a decade, serve his parents and sister-in-law, all while his own company was being propped up by her behind the scenes. Even more shocking was the revelation that this heiress quietly held a 34% stake in Croft Technologies, making her the second largest shareholder. Julian Croft himself only held 38%. This meant that she could, at any time with the help of a few minor shareholders, kick him out of his own chairman's seat. Everyone took a collective sharp breath. This woman was ruthless, not in a loud, dramatic way, but in a quiet, patient way. She had endured for 10 years, laid her plans in the shadows for 10 years, and then, in one night, checkmated him with all her pieces. She didn't want money, or the company, or any compensation, because she didn't need any of it. She was simply taking back everything she had once given. Croft Technologies' stock fell 15% the day the news broke. The next day, it fell another 12%. On the third day, Vance Holdings filed an injunction, pulling the IP license for Croft Technologies' core algorithm patents legally registered under Alara Vance. On the fourth day, facing a catastrophic stock plunge, the board of directors called an emergency meeting. With my 34% stake and a few minor shareholders I'd quietly flipped, Julian was ousted from the CEO chair of his own company. Within a week, Croft Technologies had lost 60% of its market value. Julian went insane. He called Alara over 300 times, all blocked. He waited at the Vance Holdings headquarters for 3 days, but security wouldn't let him in. He begged everyone he could think of for help. Marcus Sterling, the other CEOs, even the secretary who used to bring him coffee. No one dared to help him. Marcus Sterling was blunt on the phone. "Julian, this is business. You're embroiled in a multi-million-dollar IP lawsuit with Vance Holdings, and your stock is toxic. The board mandates we cut our losses. You're a liability now." The unspoken part was clear. In the real world, capital always follows the true power. Chloe's Cartier bracelet was repossessed by the boutique, not by Alara, but by Chloe herself, who sold it. Julian's company was failing, the family's assets were frozen overnight, and his own credit cards were declined. His mother's high blood pressure flared up, and she was hospitalized. His father had to secretly borrow money from relatives to pay the medical bills. His father said nothing, just sat in the hospital corridor day after day, smoking one cigarette after another. A month later, Julian finally cornered Alara in the underground parking garage of Vance Holdings. She had just returned from a trip, wearing a black cashmere coat, her hair loose on her shoulders, her expression unreadable. Julian rushed out from behind a pillar. He had lost a lot of weight. His eyes were sunken, his chin covered in stubble. The coat he wore was wrinkled. He was a world away from the dashing Mr. Croft of a month ago. Alara. Security immediately rushed to restrain him. Alara glanced at him and waved her hand at the guards. They released him but stood warily 3 steps away. "Please," Julian's voice was as rough as sandpaper. "I know I was wrong. I really know I was wrong. I'll do anything. I'll give you everything back." Julian stumbled forward, his legs giving out. He leaned heavily against the concrete pillar of the parking garage, sliding down until he was a crumpled mess on the cold floor. "Julian." Alara's voice was not loud, but it was as cold as ice. "Julian, we're in business. We both know apologies don't fix a breached contract." He froze in that crumpled position, looking both ridiculous and pathetic. "Why are you here? To tell me you need me? That your company is about to collapse? That your family is in chaos?" Alara looked at him, her tone as calm as if reading a report. "I know all of this. I'm the one who did it." Julian's face went completely white. "Listen carefully," Alara said, taking a step forward, the sound of her heels echoing in the garage. "The night you were at the Four Seasons with Stella Reed, I waited for you at home until 2 a.m. That was our anniversary. You forgot last year. You forgot the year before. You forgot the year before that. You don't even remember the date." Julian's lips trembled. "It's not that I didn't give you a chance." Alara's voice finally had a flicker of emotion, but it quickly returned to calm. "I gave you 10 years. In those 10 years, you had a million chances to be a little better to me. You didn't take them. You were out at your events while I waited at home. You were flirting with Stella Reed while I washed your clothes at home. You thought it was a matter of course, because in your eyes, Alara was just a woman with no temper, no background, who couldn't live without you. Well, I'm telling you now. Not only can Alara live without Julian Croft, she can live 100,000 times better." With that, Alara turned and opened her car door. "Alara!" Julian rushed forward to grab her, but was pinned by security. He struggled, his voice squeezed from his throat, choked with sobs. "Just tell me, what do I have to do for you to forgive me?" Alara paused by the car door without turning back. "Julian, you know what? There's something in this world called too late. Not every mistake can be forgiven. Not all harm can be undone. When you lose someone, you've lost them. You can't get them back." The car door closed. The engine started. The black Rolls-Royce slowly drove out of the garage. Julian collapsed onto the ground, watching the car disappear into the light at the garage exit. Tears fell, drop by drop, onto the cold concrete floor. Another month later, in the top floor boardroom of the Vance Holdings Tower, Alara, dressed in a white power suit, stood before the floor-to-ceiling glass wall, overlooking the entire city. Behind her, the long table was filled with Vance executives. In front of each of them was a file. It was the acquisition plan for Croft Technologies. "Ma'am," the chief strategy officer pushed up his glasses, his tone hesitant. "Croft Technologies' market value has shrunk by 60%, but its core business is still intact. Our assessment shows the acquisition risk is manageable. It's just... The founder, Julian Croft, has been trying to contact us. He wants to meet with you. He says he doesn't want any money. He just wants to talk to you in person." Alara turned from the window, looked at the acquisition plan, and picked up a pen. "He doesn't need to see me. He just needs to sign." The moment the pen touched the paper, there was a knock on the door. Her assistant peeked in, her expression complex. "Ma'am, there's a Mr. Julian Croft downstairs. He wants to see you. He says he's been waiting all morning." Alara walked to the window and glanced down. At the entrance of the skyscraper stood a man in a dark trench coat. His figure was tiny, like a speck of dust. He paced back and forth in the cold wind, constantly looking up at the tower. Alara pulled the blinds shut. "Let him wait." She walked back to the conference table, sat down, and opened the next file. "Let's continue," she said without looking up. Outside the window was the city's highest skyline. The sun shone on the glass facade of the Vance Tower, refracting a golden light. And she sat in the president's chair on the top floor, with the Vance Empire at her back and her own battlefield before her. After 10 years, she was finally back. He was downstairs, waiting for his old dream. She was upstairs, building her new throne. Between them lay a distance that could never be closed.